Stories from Tales of the Dervishes by Idries Shah.
The Three Fishes. 3 fishes once lived in a pool. They were a clever fish, a half-clever fish, and a stupid fish. Life continued for them very much as it is for fishes everywhere, until one day came a man. He was carrying a net, and the clever fish saw him through the water. Calling upon his experience, the stories he had heard, and his cleverness, he decided to take action. There are few places to hide in this pool, he thought. I shall therefore play dead. He summoned his strength and jumped out of the pool, landing at the feet of the fisherman, who was rather surprised. But as the clever fish was holding his breath, the fisherman supposed that he was dead, and threw him back. This fish now glided into a small hole under the bank. Now the second fish, the half-clever one, did not quite understand what had happened. So he swam up to the clever fish and asked him all about it. "Simple," said the clever fish. "I played dead, so he threw me back." So the half-clever fish immediately leapt out of the water at the fisherman's feet. "Strange," thought the fisherman, "they're leaping about all over the place." And because the half-clever fish had forgotten to hold his breath, the fisherman realized that he was alive and put him into his satchel. He turned back to peer into the water, and because he had been slightly confused by the fishes jumping onto dry land in front of him, he did not close the flap of his bag. The half-clever fish, when he realized this, was just able to ease himself out, and flipping over and over, got back into the water. He sought out the first fish, and lay panting beside him. Now the third fish, the stupid one, was not able to make anything at all of this, even when he heard the first and second fish's versions. So they went over every point with him, stressing the importance of not breathing in order to play dead. "Thank you so much. Now I understand," said the stupid fish. With these words, he hurled himself out of the water, landing just beside the fisherman. Now the fisherman, having lost 2 fish already, put this one into his bag without bothering to look at whether it was breathing or not. He cast the net again and again into the pool, but the first 2 fish were crouched into the depression under the bank, and the flap on the fisherman's bag, this time, was fully closed. Finally, the fisherman gave up. He opened the bag, realized that the stupid fish was not breathing, and took him home for the cat.
The Tale of the Sands. A stream from its source in far-off mountains, passing through every kind and description of countryside, at last reached the sands of the desert. Just as it had crossed every other barrier, the stream tried to cross this one. But it found that as fast as it ran into the sand, its waters disappeared. It was convinced, however, that its destiny was to cross this desert, and yet there was no way. Now a hidden voice, coming from the desert itself, whispered, "The wind crosses the desert, and so can the stream." The stream objected that it was dashing itself against the sand, and only getting absorbed, that the wind could fly, and this was why it could cross a desert. "By hurtling in your own accustomed way you cannot get across. You will either disappear or become a marsh. You must allow the wind to carry you over to your destination." But how could this happen? By allowing yourself to be absorbed in the wind. This idea was not acceptable to the stream. After all, it had never been absorbed before. It did not want to lose its individuality. And once having lost it, how was one to know that it could ever be regained? "The wind," said the sand, "performs this function. It takes up water, carries it over the desert, and then lets it fall again. Falling as rain, the water again becomes a river. How can I know that this is true? It is so, and if you do not believe it, you cannot become more than a quagmire, and even that could take many, many years, and it certainly is not the same as a stream. But can I not remain the same stream that I am today? You cannot in either case remain so, the whisper said. Your essential part is carried away and forms a stream again. You are called what you are even today, because you do not know which part of you is the essential one. When he heard this, certain echoes began to arise in the thoughts of the stream. Dimly he remembered a state in which he, or some part of him, was it, had been held in the arms of a wind. He also remembered, or did he, that this was the real thing, not necessarily the obvious thing, to do. And the stream raised his vapour into the welcoming arms of the wind, which gently and easily bore it upwards and along, letting it fall softly as soon as they reached a roof of a mountain many, many miles away. And because he had had his doubts, the stream was able to remember and record more strongly in his mind the details of the experience. He reflected, "Yes, now I have learned my true identity." The stream was learning. But the sands whispered, "We know, because we see it happen day after day, and because we, the sands, extend from the riverside all the way to the mountain." And that is why it is said that the way in which the stream of life is to continue on its journey is written in the sands.
The Wayward Princess. A certain king believed that what he had been taught, and what he believed, was right. In many ways, he was a just man, but he was one whose ideas were limited. One day he said to his 3 daughters, "All that I have is yours, or will be yours. Through me you obtained your life. It is my will which determines your future, and hence determines your fate." Dutifully, and quite persuaded of the truth of this, 2 of the girls agreed. The 3rd daughter, however, said, "Although my position demands that I be obedient to the laws, I cannot believe that my fate must always be determined by your opinions." "We shall see about that," said the king. He ordered her to be imprisoned in a small cell where she languished for years. Meanwhile, the king and his obedient daughters spent freely of the wealth which would otherwise have been expended upon her. The king said to himself, "This girl lies in prison, not by her own will, but by mine. This proves, sufficiently for any logical mind, that it is my will, not hers, which is determining her fate." The people of the country, hearing of their princess's situation, said to one another, "She must have done or said something very wrong for a monarch with whom we find no fault to treat his own flesh and blood so." For they had not arrived at the point where they felt the need to dispute the king's assumption of rightness in everything. From time to time, the king visited the girl. Although she was pale and weakened from her imprisonment, she refused to change her attitude. Finally, the king's patience came to an end. "Your continued defiance," he said to her, "will only annoy me further and seem to weaken my rights if you stay within my realms. I could kill you, but I am merciful. I therefore banish you into the wilderness adjoining my territory. This is a wilderness inhabited only by wild beasts and such eccentric outcasts who cannot survive in our rational society. There you will discover whether you can have an existence apart from that of your family, and if you can, whether you prefer it to ours." His decree was at once obeyed, and she was conveyed to the borders of the kingdom. The princess found herself set loose in a wild land which bore little resemblance to the sheltered surroundings of her upbringing. But she soon learned that a cave would serve for a house, that nuts and fruit came from trees as well as from golden plates, that warmth came from the sun. This wilderness had a climate and a way of existing of its own. After some time, she had so ordered her life that she had water from springs, vegetables from the earth, fire from a smouldering tree. Here, she said to herself, is a life whose elements belong together, form a completeness. Yet neither individually nor collectively do they obey the commands of my father the king. One day, a lost traveller, as it happened a man of great riches and ingenuity, came upon the exiled princess, fell in love with her, and took her back to his own country, where they were married. After a space of time, the two decided to return to the wilderness, where they built a huge and prosperous city, where their wisdom, resources, and faith were expressed to their fullest possible extent. The eccentrics and other outcasts, many of them thought to be madmen, harmonized completely and usefully with this many-sided life. The city and its surrounding countryside became renowned throughout the entire world. It was not long before its power and beauty far outshone that of the realm of the princess's father. By the unanimous choice of the inhabitants, the princess and her husband were elected to the joint monarchy of this new and ideal kingdom. At length, the king decided to visit the strange and mysterious place which had sprung up in a wilderness, and which was, he heard, peopled at least in part by those whom he and his like despised. As, with bowed head, he slowly approached the foot of the throne, upon which the young couple sat, and raised his eyes to meet those whose repute of justice, prosperity, and understanding far exceeded his own, he was able to catch the murmured words of his daughter. "You see, father, every man and woman has his own fate and his own choice."
The Three Teachers and the Muleteers. Such was the repute of Abdul Qadir that mystics of all persuasions used to throng to his reception hall, and the utmost decorum and consideration for the traditional manners uniformly prevailed. These pious men arranged themselves in order of precedence, of age, and according to the repute which their teachers had enjoyed, and their own precedence in their own communities. Yet they vied with one another for the attention of the Sultan of the teachers, Abdul Qadir. His manners were impeccable, and nobody of low intelligence or lack of training was seen at these assemblies. One day, however, the three sheikhs of Khorasan, Iraq, and Egypt came to the Dargah, guided by three illiterate muleteers. Their journey from Mecca, where they had been on a pilgrimage, had been plagued by the inelegance and caperings of these men. When they saw the assembly of the sheikh, they were made as happy to think of their release from their companions as they were by their desire to glimpse the great sheikh. Contrary to the usual practice, the sheikh came out to meet them. No sign passed between him and the muleteers. Later that night, however, finding their way to their quarters, the three sheikhs glimpsed by accident the sheikh saying good night to the muleteers. As they respectfully left his room, he kissed their hands. The sheikhs were astonished, and realized that these three, and not they, were hidden sheikhs of the Dervishes. They followed the muleteers and tried to start a conversation. But the chief muleteer only said, "Get back to your prayers and mumblings, sheikhs, with your Sufism and your search for truth which has plagued us during 36 days' travel. We are simple muleteers and want nothing of that." Thus is the difference between the hidden Sufis and the superficial ones.
Fatima, the Spinner, and the Tent. Once in a city in the farthest west, there lived a girl called Fatima. She was the daughter of a prosperous spinner. One day her father said to her, "Come, daughter, we are going on a journey, for I have business in the isles of the Middle Sea. Perhaps you may find some handsome youth in a good situation whom you could take as a husband." They set off and travelled from island to island, the father doing his trading, while Fatima dreamt of the husband who might soon be hers. One day, however, they were on the way to Crete when a storm blew up and the ship was wrecked. Fatima, only half conscious, was cast up on the seashore near Alexandria. Her father was dead, and she was utterly destitute. She could only remember dimly her life until then, for her experience of the shipwreck and her exposure in the sea had utterly exhausted her. While she was wandering on the sands, a family of clothmakers found her. Although they were poor, they took her into their humble home and taught her their craft. Thus it was that she made a second life for herself, and within a year or two she was happy and reconciled to her lot. But one day, when she was on the seashore for some reason, a band of slave traders landed and carried her along with other captives away with them. Although she bitterly lamented her lot, Fatima found no sympathy from the slavers who took her to Istanbul and sold her as a slave. Her world had collapsed for the second time. Now it chanced that there were few buyers at the market. One of them was a man who was looking for slaves to work in his woodyard where he made masts for ships. When he saw the dejection of the unfortunate Fatima, he decided to buy her, thinking that in this way at least he might be able to give her a slightly better life than if she were bought by someone else. He took Fatima to his home, intending to make her a serving-maid for his wife. When he arrived at the house, however, he found that he had lost all his money in a cargo which had been captured by pirates. He could not afford workers, so he, Fatima, and his wife were left alone to work at the heavy labour of making masts. Fatima, grateful to her employer for rescuing her, worked so hard and so well that he gave her her freedom, and she became his trusted helper. Thus it was that she became comparatively happy in her third career. One day he said to her, "Fatima, I want you to go with a cargo of ship's masts to Java as my agent, and be sure that you sell them at a profit." She set off, but when the ship was off the coast of China, a typhoon wrecked it, and Fatima found herself again cast up on the seashore of a strange land. Once again she wept bitterly, for she felt that nothing in her life was working in accordance with expectation. Whenever things seemed to be going well, something came and destroyed all her hopes. "Why is it," she cried out for the third time, "that whenever I try to do something it comes to grief? Why should so many unfortunate things happen to me?" But there was no answer. So she picked herself up from the sand and started to walk inland. Now it so happened that nobody in China had heard of Fatima or knew anything about her troubles. But there was a legend that a certain stranger, a woman, would one day arrive there, and that she would be able to make a tent for the emperor. And since there was as yet nobody in China who could make tents, everyone looked upon the fulfillment of this prediction with the liveliest anticipation. In order to make sure that this stranger, when she arrived, would not be missed, successive emperors of China had followed the custom of sending heralds once a year to all the towns and villages of the land, asking for any foreign woman to be produced at court. When Fatima stumbled into a town by the Chinese seashore, it was one such occasion. The people spoke to her through an interpreter and explained that she would have to go to see the emperor. "Lady," said the emperor when Fatima was brought to him, "can you make a tent?" "I think so," said Fatima. She asked for rope, but there was none to be had. So, remembering her time as a spinner, she collected flax and made ropes. Then she asked for stout cloth, but the Chinese had none of the kind which she needed. So, drawing on her experience with the weavers of Alexandria, she made some stout tent cloth. Then she found that she needed tent poles, but there were none in China. So Fatima, remembering how she had been trained by the wood fashioner of Istanbul, cunningly made stout tent poles. When these were ready, she racked her brains for the memory of all the tents she had seen in her travels. And lo, a tent was made. When this wonder was revealed to the Emperor of China, he offered Fatima the fulfillment of any wish she cared to name. She chose to settle in China, where she married a handsome prince, and where she remained in happiness, surrounded by her children, until the end of her days. It was through these adventures that Fatima realized that what had appeared to be an unpleasant experience at the time turned out to be an essential part of the making of her ultimate happiness.
The man who was easily angered. A man who was very easily angered realized after many years that all his life he had been in difficulties because of this tendency. One day he heard of a dervish of deep knowledge, whom he went to see asking for advice. The dervish said, "Go to such and such a crossroads. There you will find a withered tree. Stand under it and offer water to every traveller who passes that place." The man did as he was told. Many days passed, and he became well known as one who was following a certain discipline of charity and self-control under the instructions of a man of real knowledge. One day, a man in a hurry turned his head away when he was offered the water, and went on walking along the road. The man, who was easily angered, called out to him several times, "Come, return my salutation. Have some of this water which I provide for all travellers." But there was no reply. Overcome by this behaviour, the first man forgot his discipline completely. He reached for his gun, which was hooked in the withered tree, took aim at the heedless traveller, and fired. The man fell dead. At the very moment that the bullet entered his body, the withered tree, as if by a miracle, burst joyfully into blossom. The man who had been killed was a murderer, on his way to commit the worst crime of a long career. There are, you see, two kinds of advisers. The first kind is the one who tells what should be done according to certain fixed principles repeated mechanically. The other kind is the man of knowledge. Those who meet the man of knowledge will ask him for moralistic advice, and will treat him as a moralist. But what he serves is truth, not pious hopes.
The Mountain Path. An intelligent man, a scholar with a trained mind, came one day to a village. He wanted to compare, as an exercise and a study, the different points of view which might be represented there. He went to the caravanserai and asked for the most truthful inhabitant and also the greatest liar of the village. The people who were there agreed unanimously that the man called Kazab was their greatest liar, and that Rastgu was the truthful one. In turn he visited them, asking each a simple question. What is the best way to the next village? Rastgu, the truthful, said, The mountain path. Kazab, the liar, also said, The mountain path. Not unnaturally, this puzzled the traveller a great deal. So he asked a few others, ordinary citizens. Some said, The river, others, across the fields, and others again said, The mountain path. He took the mountain path, but in addition to the matter of the goal of his journey, the problem of the truthful and the liars of the village troubled him. When he got to the next village and related his story at the rest house, he ended, I evidently made the basic logical mistake of asking the wrong people for the name of the truthful and the liar. I arrived here quite easily by the mountain path. A wise man who was present spoke. Logicians, it must be admitted, tend to be blind and have to ask others to help them. But the matter here is otherwise. The facts are thus. The river is the easiest route, so the liar suggested the mountain. But the truthful man was not only truthful. He noticed that you had a donkey, which made the journey easy enough. The liar happened to be unobservant of the fact that you had no boat. Otherwise he would have suggested the river.
The Dervish and the Princess. A king's daughter was as fair as the moon, and admired by all. A dervish saw her one day, as he was about to eat a piece of bread. The morsel fell to the ground, for he was so deeply moved that he could not hold it. As she passed by, she smiled upon him. This action sent him into convulsions, his bread in the dust, his senses half bereft. In a state of ecstasy, he remained thus for 7 years. The dervish spent all that time in the street, where dogs slept. He was a nuisance to the princess, and her attendants decided to kill him. But she called him to her and said, "There can be no union between you and me, and my slaves intend to kill you. Therefore disappear." The miserable man answered, "Since I first saw you, life is nothing to me. They will kill me without cause. But please answer me one question, since you are to be the cause of my death. Why did you smile at all?" "Foolish man," said the princess, "when I saw what a fool you were making of yourself, I smiled in pity, not for any other reason." And she disappeared from his sight.